Well, I knew Ann hired this cut-rate press agent, without my consent, I might add. So I simply put two and two together.
Donald, you put two and two together nicer than anybody I know.
From backwards train footage to a restaurant owner turned fashion designer, the groundbreaking sitcom That Girl hides surprising secrets beneath its mod dresses and flip hairdo. This show about independence had an uncredited female executive producer, train tracks filmed on the wrong side, and a wedding that never happened for feminist reasons. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about That Girl fact. 1. The opening credits train was filmed backwards.
I have? Oh, Mr. Benedict, you mean I'm going to audition for you? I'll audition right after I'm turned down after the audition. I'm so excited about it.
If you watch the opening credits of That Girl closely, you might notice something odd about the train sequence that introduces viewers to Anne Marie's journey into New York City. The iconic shot of the train barreling toward Manhattan was actually filmed from the back of a New Jersey-bound train traveling on the Northeast Corridor line, and then the footage was reversed in post-production to make it look like the train was heading into the city instead of leaving it. This creative filmmaking trick worked perfectly to establish the show's Manhattan setting, but it left behind one telltale clue that sharp-eyed viewers can still catch today. If you look carefully at the landscape passing by during that train sequence, you can see the New Jersey Turnpike in the background, and the traffic on that highway is moving backwards, completely giving away the fact that the film was reversed. The production team likely chose to film the sequence this way because it was easier and safer to mount cameras on the rear of an outbound train rather than trying to capture footage from the front of an inbound train. And they probably assumed that viewers would be too focused on Marlo Thomas and the energetic theme song to notice the backwards moving cars on the distant highway. For a show that was all about a young woman moving forward into her independent life in the big city, it's ironic that the opening sequence literally shows her traveling in reverse, even if the final edited version makes it look like she's heading in the right direction toward her dreams and adventures in Manhattan. Fact 2. Marlo wanted to call it Miss Independence.
It was kind of sproinged.
Drawing?
Well, you know, sproing.
Before That Girl became the title that would define the series and enter television history, Marlo Thomas had a completely different name in mind that was much more direct about the show's groundbreaking message. She wanted to call the sitcom Miss Independence, which was actually the affectionate nickname her parents, comedian Danny Thomas and his wife Rose Marie, had given her throughout her childhood because of her fiercely independent spirit and determination to make her own way in the world. The title Miss Independence would have made the show's feminist themes impossible to miss, putting the concept of a woman's autonomy and self-sufficiency right there in the name every single week. However, the network and producers eventually decided that That Girl was catchier, more memorable, and perhaps less intimidating to 1960s audiences who might not have been ready for such an overtly feminist title on their television screens. Looking back, it's fascinating to imagine how differently the show might have been perceived if it had been called Miss Independence instead, because that title leaves absolutely no room for misunderstanding what the series was really about. While That Girl became iconic in its own right and spawned the famous freeze-frame gag that punctuated nearly every episode, the rejected title reveals just how intentional Marlo Thomas was about using the show as a vehicle for advancing women's independence at a time when most female characters on television were wives and mothers, rather than single career women living on their own and pursuing their dreams in the big city. Fact 3. A restaurant owner designed the iconic costumes.
Why? Because the Parisienne is a better name for a French restaurant.
So?
So?
One of the most memorable aspects of That Girl was Anne Marie's incredibly stylish wardrobe, which helped define the mod look of the 1960s and turned the show into a fashion trendsetter for young women across America. What most viewers never knew was that many of those eye-catching outfits were designed by Marilyn Lewis under her fashion label Cardinale. And before she became a sought-after fashion designer dressing television stars, Lewis had a completely different career that had nothing to do with clothing. She and her husband co-founded the legendary Hamburger Hamlet restaurant chain back in 1950, creating one of the most beloved and successful casual dining concepts in Los Angeles history. The Hamburger Hamlet became famous for its upscale approach to hamburgers and comfort food, attracting celebrities and regular diners alike to its locations throughout Southern California. And it was this restaurant business that first brought Lewis success and connections in the entertainment industry. Somewhere along the way, her passion for fashion led her to launch the Cardinale label, and her designs caught the attention of costume departments looking for contemporary, sophisticated looks that would make their shows feel current and fashionable. The fact that a restaurateur was responsible for dressing one of television's most fashionable characters adds an unexpected layer to the behind-the-scenes story of that girl, showing that creative talent can emerge from the most unlikely places and that success in one industry can open doors to entirely different opportunities in another field. Fact 4. The unaired 1965 pilot had completely different characters.
Yeah, I think this is the time. Listen, I better hang up now. Ann should be here any minute. Bye.
Most fans of That Girl have no idea that the show they fell in love with was actually significantly different from the original version that was first filmed, because there was an entire pilot episode shot in 1965 that featured completely different characters and a rather unusual backstory that the network decided to abandon before the series officially launched. In that original unaired pilot, Ted Bessel played a character named Don Blue Sky, who was Anne Marie's talent agent, rather than her boyfriend Donald Hollinger, and the character was written as being part Cherokee, giving him a very different identity and relationship dynamic with Anne than what eventually made it to air. Even more surprising, Anne's parents were played by entirely different actors in that first pilot, with Harold Gould and Penny Santon taking on the roles that would eventually go to Lou Parker and Rosemary DeCamp in the series that audiences actually saw. The network clearly felt that something wasn't working with this initial concept, so they retooled the show, recast several key roles, and transformed Ted Bessel's character from a talent agent named Don Blue Sky into the magazine writer Donald Hollinger that viewers came to know and love. That original pilot remained completely unseen for over 3 decades, tucked away in the vaults like a strange alternate universe version of the show, until Nick at Night finally aired it in April of 1996, giving longtime fans their first glimpse of what That Girl almost was before it became the cultural phenomenon they remembered. Fact 5. Marlowe was an uncredited executive producer at age 28.
But they insisted on the bangs, so I had to have bangs as That Girl. And then in the last season, I think I finally had my hair parted in the middle.
While the opening credits of That Girl listed Bill Persky and Sam Deanoff as the creators and executive producers of the series, the real power behind the show was actually Marlo Thomas herself, who wielded enormous creative control despite never receiving an official executive producer credit during the show's original run. At just 28 years old when the series premiered, Thomas had negotiated an unprecedented deal that gave her production company, Daisy Productions, significant authority over every aspect of the show, from casting decisions to script approval to the overall creative direction of the series. This arrangement made her a de facto executive producer in everything but title, and she used that power to ensure that That Girl reflected her vision of an independent woman navigating life and career on her own terms in New York City. The fact that she didn't receive official credit for this role reflects the gender dynamics of the entertainment industry in the 1960s, when it was still unusual for women, especially young actresses, to have that kind of behind-the-scenes power, and the studios and networks were perhaps reluctant to publicly acknowledge just how much control she actually had. Thomas made major decisions about storylines, vetoed ideas she felt undermined the show's feminist message, and fought battles with the network over everything from Anne Marie's wardrobe to whether the series would end with a wedding. and she did all of this while also starring in every single episode. Her uncredited executive producer role makes her achievement even more impressive, because she was essentially doing two demanding jobs simultaneously while breaking new ground for women in television, both in front of and behind the camera. Fact 6. The show never cracked the top 30 as in.
Worry about that. I can get you a girl.
Oh, you're going to get me a girl? What would my other girl say?
What other girl?
That girl.
Despite becoming a cultural phenomenon that influenced fashion, inspired countless young women, and is still remembered today as a groundbreaking series that changed how female characters were portrayed on television, That Girl had a surprising secret that would shock most people who assume it must have been a massive ratings hit. Throughout its entire 5-season run from 1966 to 1971, the show never once broke into the top 30 programs in the Nielsen ratings, which measured which shows Americans were actually watching each week. This means that while That Girl was making headlines, generating buzz, and becoming a touchstone for the women's liberation movement, it was consistently being outperformed by dozens of other shows that have been largely forgotten by history. The series managed to stay on the air for 5 seasons, despite these middling ratings, because it attracted a highly desirable demographic of young, urban, educated viewers who appealed to advertisers, and because the show's cultural impact far exceeded what its Nielsen numbers might suggest. ABC recognized that That Girl was important and influential even if it wasn't pulling in massive audiences, and the network was willing to keep it on the air because it gave them prestige and relevance with younger viewers who were increasingly important to the future of television. This disconnect between cultural impact and actual viewership numbers is a reminder that ratings don't tell the whole story of a show's importance, and that sometimes a series can change television history and influence society without ever being the most watched program on any given week. Fact 7. Ted Bessel performed at Carnegie Hall at age 12.
But what about Freddie Dunlap? We don't know who he's interested in.
Meaning what?
Meaning you.
Long before Ted Bessel became known to millions of viewers as Donald Hollinger, the patient and supportive boyfriend on That Girl, he was a remarkably talented child who demonstrated extraordinary musical ability at a very young age. When Bessel was just 12 years old, he performed a piano recital at Carnegie Hall, one of the most prestigious performance venues in the entire world, which gives you some idea of just how gifted he was as a young pianist and how seriously he pursued music before eventually turning to acting as his primary career. Performing at Carnegie Hall as a preteen is the kind of achievement that typically indicates a young person is on track to become a professional concert pianist, so the fact that Bessel ultimately chose acting instead represents a significant pivot in his life path. But his talents didn't stop with music, because he was also an accomplished athlete during his high school years, playing lacrosse, alongside a teammate who would go on to become one of the greatest football players in history, Jim Brown, who dominated the National Football League in the 1950s and 60s and is still considered one of the best running backs who ever played the game. This combination of artistic and athletic achievement paints a picture of Ted Bessel as someone with remarkable range and ability across multiple disciplines, which perhaps explains why he brought such depth and intelligence to the role of Donald Hollinger, creating a character who was smart, cultured, and completely believable as someone who would appreciate and support Anne-Marie's independence and ambitions. Fact 8. Marlowe refused a wedding finale for feminist reasons.
He just likes me because I'm a fan. I don't mean anything to him. You'll see when we go back there.
You're not going. I don't want you anywhere near him.
As That Girl approached its final season, both ABC and the show's major sponsor, Clairol, were pushing hard for the series to end with the wedding that fans had been waiting for throughout the show's 5-year run, believing that seeing Anne-Marie finally marry Donald Hollinger would provide the perfect, satisfying conclusion that would leave viewers happy. However, Marlo Thomas had very different ideas about how the show should end, And she stood firm against tremendous pressure from the network and advertisers because she felt that ending with a wedding would completely undermine everything the series had been trying to say about women's independence and self-determination. Thomas argued passionately that making marriage the happy ending would send the message that a woman's story is only complete when she gets married, and that all of Anne's struggles and achievements as a single, independent woman working in New York City would be reduced to merely the prelude to her real fulfillment through marriage. She believed this conclusion would betray the show's feminist message and tell young women watching that no matter how successful or happy they were on their own, their lives weren't truly complete until they had a husband. Instead of giving in to what the network and sponsor wanted, Thomas insisted on a very different final episode that reflected her values and the show's original mission. The series ended with Anne taking Donald to a women's liberation meeting, making the final statement of the show about feminism and equality rather than wedding bells and matrimony. And while this ending was controversial at the time and disappointed some viewers who wanted to see the wedding, it remained true to the groundbreaking spirit that had made that girl special in the first place. Fact 9. Marlo brought her London wardrobe from Barefoot in the Park.
You put the article in my sandwich.
Well, it's just my little way of saying I'd like you to eat your words.
The M.O.-odd, fashion-forward look that defined Anne-Marie's style and made that girl a trendsetter wasn't originally part of the show's plan, and it only happened because of fortunate timing and Marlo Thomas's determination to fight for her vision against producers who were actually afraid her clothes would ruin the show. Just before filming began on That Girl, Thomas had been performing in a London production of the Neil Simon play Barefoot in the Park, and while she was in England during the height of swinging London in the mid-1960s, she had assembled a wardrobe filled with the latest mod fashions that were exploding on the streets of Carnaby Street and King's Road. When she returned to Los Angeles to begin work on the television series, she brought all of those contemporary cutting-edge clothes with her, envisioning Anne-Marie as a fashion-forward young woman whose style would reflect the exciting changes happening in youth culture and women's fashion. However, the show's producers took one look at her trendy London wardrobe and strongly objected, telling Thomas that those fashionable clothes would date the show and make it look ridiculous in just a few years when the styles inevitably changed. They wanted Anne-Marie to wear more conservative, traditional clothing that wouldn't tie the series to any particular fashion moment, essentially arguing for a timeless but bland approach to her wardrobe. Thomas refused to back down, insisting that Anne-Marie should look like a real young woman living in New York City in the 1960s, wearing the kinds of clothes that actual fashionable young women were wearing. And she ultimately won the battle, establishing the show's signature style that would make it a fashion influence for young women across America. Fact 10. Mary Quant designed the early season costumes.
I needed working capital. Nobody told us we couldn't do it, and we did it.
While much has been written about the fashionable clothing that made That Girl such a style icon, one surprising detail about Anne-Marie's wardrobe remained relatively unknown until Marlo Thomas herself revealed it years later in the DVD commentary for the series. According to Thomas, the clothes that Anne-Marie wore during the 1966 and 1967 episodes were actually designed by Mary Quant, the legendary British fashion designer who is credited with inventing the miniskirt and was one of the most influential figures in the swinging London fashion revolution that transformed women's clothing in the 1960s. Having Mary Quant design costumes for an American television sitcom was an extraordinary coup that would be like having a major haute couture designer dressing a sitcom character today, and it meant that Anne-Marie was wearing clothes on network television that were at the absolute cutting edge of contemporary fashion, bringing London's mod style directly into American living rooms every week. Quant's designs were known for being youthful, playful, and liberating, with shorter hemlines and simpler silhouettes that allowed young women more freedom of movement and a more casual, modern approach to dressing, which fit perfectly with the show's themes of independence and breaking free from traditional expectations. The fact that That Girl featured Mary Quant's designs in its early seasons helps explain why the show had such a powerful influence on fashion, and why Anne Marie's look was so copied by young women watching the show, because they weren't just seeing any costumes, they were seeing creations from one of the most important and innovative designers of the entire decade. Fact 11. Bernie Kopell was simultaneously playing a spy villain.
Some of whom were my best, dearest, sweetest, kindest friends.
Television audiences in the late 1960s witnessed one of the most bizarrely contradictory casting situations in sitcom history, though most viewers probably never noticed the strange double life that actor Bernie Kopell was leading across two different shows on two different networks. On That Girl, Kopell played Jerry Bauman, Donald Hollinger's friendly colleague at Newsview magazine, who was a regular supporting character offering advice and comic relief throughout the series. But at exactly the same time, from 1966 through 1969, Kopell was also appearing on Get Smart as Siegfried, the bumbling but evil villain who served as a chaos agent constantly trying to destroy Maxwell Smart and Control, making him one of the show's primary antagonists. This meant that viewers could watch Bernie Kopell playing a nice, helpful friend on Tuesday nights, and then see the exact same actor playing a sinister spy villain on Saturday nights, creating a completely surreal viewing experience if you happen to be a fan of both shows. The contrast between the two characters couldn't have been more extreme, with Jerry Bauman being a supportive buddy in a romantic sitcom about everyday life in New York City, while Siegfried was an international criminal mastermind trying to take over the world through various ridiculous schemes. Kopell somehow managed to keep both roles going simultaneously for 3 years, and he apparently had no trouble switching between the gentle comedy of That Girl and the broader spy spoof humor of Get Smart, demonstrating impressive range and the ability to make audiences believe in two completely different characters at the same time, even though they looked identical. Fact 12. The That Girl freeze-frame gag wasn't meant to last.
Would you excuse me a moment? I think I'll get some more coffee.
I'll join you.
One of the most memorable and distinctive elements of That Girl was the running gag where someone in the episode would say the words, "That girl," while pointing at or referring to Anne Marie, and at that exact moment the picture would freeze frame on her face while the theme music played, creating a funny and self-aware moment that connected the show's title to the action happening on screen. This freeze-frame gag became so closely associated with the series that it's hard to imagine the show without it, appearing in almost every single episode and becoming one of the signature techniques that made That Girl feel fresh and innovative compared to other sitcoms of the era. However, this recurring bit that seemed so essential to the show's identity was originally intended to be used only once in the pilot episode, and the producers never expected it to become a permanent feature of the series. The creative team behind the show believed that after using the gag in the pilot, they would never be able to find enough natural, believable ways to work the phrase, "that girl," into the dialogue of future episodes without it feeling forced or artificial. And they assumed that trying to repeat the gag week after week would quickly become tiresome and draw attention to the show's writers struggling to shoehorn the title into conversations. But as they continued developing scripts, they discovered that it was actually surprisingly easy to find organic moments where someone would naturally refer to Anne Marie as "that girl." And the freeze frame became such a beloved element that they kept finding excuses to include it throughout the show's entire 5-season run. Fact 13. Marlo met her future husband on his talk show in 1977.
Very with it. And girls loved it. You know, the fishnet stockings and the white boots and all.
6 years after That Girl ended its run in 1971, Marlo Thomas made what seemed like a routine promotional appearance on The Phil Donahue Show in 1977. But what happened during that episode turned into one of the most famous celebrity first meetings in television history. From the moment Thomas and Donahue began talking on camera, the chemistry between them was so obvious, so electric, and so genuine that millions of viewers watching at home essentially witnessed what amounted to their first date happening live on daytime television. The conversation that was supposed to be a standard celebrity interview about Thomas's work and career kept veering into personal territory, with Donahue clearly captivated by his guest and Thomas responding with equal interest, and the audience could feel something real developing right before their eyes. This wasn't acting or performance. It was two people discovering an authentic connection with each other while the cameras captured every moment, and the television audience became accidental witnesses to the beginning of what would become a long and successful marriage. The appearance was so memorable and the chemistry so undeniable that people still remember it decades later as one of those rare television moments where something genuine and unscripted happened that was far more interesting than anything that could have been planned. Thomas and Donahue married 3 years later in 1980, proving that what viewers had sensed during that talk show appearance was real, and they've remained together ever since, making that 1977 episode of The Phil Donahue Show the unlikely beginning of one of entertainment's most enduring marriages. Fact 14. Danny Thomas appeared as a priest and performed with Marlo.
Couple of games, and then you say, well, let's play for something. Maybe that'll help me a little bit.
Having Marlo Thomas's famous father, Danny Thomas, appear on That Girl must have seemed like an obvious idea given his stature as one of television's biggest stars from his own sitcom, Make Room for Daddy. But the show handled his guest appearances in surprisingly subtle and creative ways, rather than making a big deal out of his celebrity. In his first appearance on the series, Danny Thomas played a priest, and his entire scene with his daughter consisted of Anne-Marie accidentally bumping into him on the street and simply saying, "Excuse me, Father," before moving on, creating a brief, amusing moment where viewers who recognized him got the joke, while the character of Anne-Marie had no idea she'd just run into someone important. This understated cameo was a clever way to include him without disrupting the reality of the show's world or making it feel like a stunt casting moment. However, Danny Thomas returned for a more substantial guest appearance in the episode Those Friars, where he played himself and the story allowed father and daughter to perform together on screen, giving them a chance to share a genuinely emotional moment. During that episode, Marlo and Danny sang Together Wherever We Go as a duet, and the performance carried extra weight because it featured a real father and daughter singing about staying connected, which resonated beyond the context of the show and gave viewers a glimpse of their actual relationship. These two very different guest appearances showed the range of ways the series incorporated Danny Thomas, from playful cameo to meaningful collaboration, acknowledging his importance without letting his presence overwhelm the show. Fact 15. Ted Bessel died while planning a That Girl TV movie reunion.
You just mentioned we were in a film.
We were in a film together, yes.
Ah, I know what film it was.
More than 2 decades after That Girl ended, Marlo Thomas and Ted Bessel were actively developing a television movie that would reunite Anne-Marie and Donald Hollinger and show audiences what had become of the beloved characters in the years since the series finale. The reunion movie they were planning had a surprisingly dramatic premise that would have taken the characters in a much more serious direction than the lighthearted sitcom that made them famous, with the story revealing that Anne and Donald had gone their separate ways after the series ended, but were now coming back together years later under very different circumstances. According to the concept they were developing, Donald would be divorced and Anne would be a widow, giving both characters complicated histories and emotional baggage that would make their reunion both bittersweet and meaningful as they navigated middle age and second chances at love. This storyline would have allowed Thomas and Bessel to show how their characters had evolved and matured, bringing depth and real adult emotion to figures that audiences remembered from a much more innocent and optimistic era of television. However, The reunion movie never happened because Ted Bessel died from an aortic aneurysm on October 6, 1996, just as the development process was beginning and before the project could move forward into actual production. His sudden death at the age of 61 ended any possibility of bringing Anne and Donald back to screens and left fans wondering what might have been if Bessel had lived to complete the reunion project with Thomas and give their characters one more chapter together.